How long does it really take? Thanks to our listener, Stephen, for asking us this question. He had a very specific question, but at root, it was how long does this clearance process actually take? He said for a non-invasive device, but we're going to try to do this question justice. And at the root of the question that was asked, how long does it really take, is a recognition that what you hear and what actually happens are probably different things. So I want to take you here for a moment to Path Surveyor. PathSurveyor.com, you're free to use it. It is a tool that we've created into being. It's a front door for the FDA 510K database. And if we look here, the product code GZJ for a TENS unit. I just picked a TENS unit because it's an interesting device that can be used for pain relief. And what we see is it's a class 2 device. Oops, we're going to have to refresh this page because I totally hit the wrong button. Down the page here, one of the benefits of Path Surveyor is it shows you historic clearance times for the product code that you're looking at. As a freebie here, also recently approved devices in that product code, along with their K numbers that you can click on, as well as some redacted device full submissions. If you want to see the entire 510K for certain devices, they have been redacted, but they are down there, and you can take a look at those. But let's talk about these clearance times. How long does it actually take to get a TENS unit, for example, cleared in the US? From the time that the FDA receives the application and acknowledges it to the time that the device is cleared. And as you can see, if we pick some of these troughs, here's one, 29 days. Wow, that's pretty good. Every investor and entrepreneur in the place is going, yay, that's what I want for my device. Here's another one recently in April this year, 60 days. Not too bad. FDA gets the file, 60 days later, you have a clearance. Here's another one, 79 days, also respectable. 29 days, we said that one, 56 days, not too shabby. What's this peak? 783 days. What's this peak? 598 days, with everything in between. Hundreds of days, tens of days. What's the right answer? And why are these so different? That's one product code. Let's take a look at another. Let's take a look at the DPS product code. The DPS product code. Oops, didn't quite get it to come up. Oh, let's take a completely different one, as long as we're here. EKX, I don't even know what it is. That's a dental handpiece. Let's try over here. There we go. Here's another one. This is a picture archiving and communications system for radiology. Just to show you can do this for any product code. And here are the historic clearance times for 510K under product code PGY. There are some pretty short ones, 21 days, 26 days, but some of the peaks, 252, 264, and one that I can't get to pop up here because of the cursor, but we're in the couple hundred days of time. Going back to pre-2015, you can see there was a 400-day clearance that probably didn't make anyone very happy. So again, what's behind all of this? Well, let's start first of all with the official timeline for a 510K. FDA says that officially, well, here's the big change. There is actually a new process. Starting October 1st of this year, we're already in it. We're 19 days into it. All 510K submissions, unless they are exempted, have to be submitted as electronic submissions using eStar. For the longest time, we had to send in paper copies with a CD or a thumb drive. The shippers got a lot of business with overnight shipping. But since eStar is now the law of the land, we're going to focus on the new process. And FDA has some cool client portals and dashboards and things like that. When they get a submission, they assign a K number. So for example, K23000 1 23 00001. That's the first submission of the calendar year 2023. K230002. That's the second submission of the 2023 calendar year. What happens next? Well, usually within about 7 days, FDA has the right to issue what they call a hold letter, to say, hold up, something's wrong here, we're not okay with it. You have up to 180 days to respond to that hold letter. Now, hopefully you won't take all of that, otherwise you wouldn't have submitted this in the first place. If you don't get a hold letter, you're going to get an acknowledgement letter. And FDA tries to do a substantive review of your file within 60 days from the receipt of submission. FDA's goal is to issue a substantially equivalent or not substantially equivalent decision within 90 days of the receipt of your file. Now, of course, that's not the whole story, because many submissions take more than 90 days. What happens? Well, FDA reaches out with what's called an additional information request, and they can do this multiple times. The additional information request gives you an additional 180 days to respond to the agency. That's your clock time. Now, if you don't respond to them, this application is considered withdrawn, and you're going to have to start again with a completely new 510K. Those are the kinds of things that officially delay the FDA timeline. It's largely, hey, you didn't send us what we need, or hey, we need more information. And that can push it out, and with multiple additional information requests, the timeline can get longer. But in theory, within 90 days, plus the AI requests. Well, what are the things that you can do to mess this up? Well, not responding quickly to an AI, or not having all the information in your filing in the first place. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But where I want to take you, and I think this is just absolutely fascinating. This is what's wrong with Gene. What's absolutely fascinating is a 288-page document reporting on the Medical Device User Fee Act for fiscal year 2023. Wow, you have to say that with a lot of energy to get excited about it. And we're not going to do the whole thing, folks. But let's take a look at the index here. PMAs, pre-market authorizations. We're going to skip that entirely, but they've got metrics, goals, reporting on how FDA has been doing at PMAs. Where we're interested, Section 6, 510K performance. And we're going to just sort of zoom down here and find the section on 510K performance. How has the agency been doing fiscal year 2023 on 510Ks? This was written in Q3 and really has information on the first, I'd say, 6 months of the year. A lot of interesting details here. The percent of 510Ks that have an additional information request, that 180-day pause. You can do it as fast as you want, but you've got 180 days. What percent of 510Ks got that additional information request in that first FDA review cycle? Right now, that's around 67% for the last few years. That's pretty good. That means that they don't have a lot to ask on maybe 30% of the applications. But compare that to back in 2002, when the FDA only did additional information requests on about a third of the applications. That's quite a difference, going from 36% to 67%. But I also want to draw your attention to roughly around 2010 to 2012, when the agency was doing 75% additional information requests. And at the same time period, they were doing another 30% additional information requests on the second review cycle. So the 3/4 chance you were going to get asked for more information on the first cycle, and a 1/3 chance you were going to get asked for more information on the second cycle. Fortunately, even though we're at 67% for the first review cycle, we're down at like a couple of percent for the second review cycle. So if you get through that first review cycle without an information request or getting through that additional information request, you're in pretty good shape. So how long is FDA saying this takes on average? You saw a plot for a couple of different product codes dancing all around from 30 days to 400 days. What's the average from FDA's perspective? Well, in blue is the average days, FDA days, when their clock is not paused, to MDUFA decision. And while back at the turn of the millennia, can I say that? It was around 75 or 80%. And then in COVID, it was back up to nearly 83%. It's been hovering in that 60 to 80 days, sorry, not percent, days range, which is within its window, right? It's more than their 60-day goal to get back to you. It's less than their 90-day goal for the decision. So those are the FDA days. The days that it takes a company to interact with the FDA, in that similar range. We're in that 70-day range. So during COVID, we were up in the 160-day average. Maybe of late, maybe 140 days is a good thing to think. You've submitted to FDA. On average, what should I expect? Well, about a 2/3 chance that I'm going to get an additional information request, and about a 140-day average window to clearance. 140-day average window to clearance. Could I get it in 30 days? Maybe. Rare. Could it take 400? Maybe. Rare. What should I expect my average is? About 140 days. I'm going to take you on to some other data from this that I thought was really interesting. How many 510Ks are pending at the end of a time period? Of late, they've had a lot pending more than 90 days, but we can blame COVID for that. When they were really humming here in 2010 to 2020, they were barely carrying any more than 90 days. But carrying from quarter to quarter and carrying from year to year, we're in the 1,000 or so. Because if you apply at the end of the year, they're not going to finish it that year. They're going to carry it over to the next year. About 80%, roughly 80%, get a substantially equivalent decision from FDA. So if you've submitted and you just want to play the numbers, about 80% probability, 80 to 87% probability, you're going to get a substantially equivalent positive decision. Of course, it depends on your submission, right? The ones that don't get through are not getting through just out of probabilistic thing. It's because they weren't necessarily a submission that FDA could buy into. A few more metrics here on 510Ks. Fiscal year 2023 by Q3, 2,628 510Ks received. 33 were closed before they even made it out of the gate. 1,800 accepted on the first cycle. If we come down here, we've got the number of substantive interactions FDA had, nearly 2,000. There's all sorts of data in here. This thing is just absolutely chock full. You can look it up if you want. I did think this was interesting. The rate of substantially equivalent decisions was nearly 99% of the decisions made in 2023. Of the decisions made in 2023, only 10 out of 1,000 basically got NSE. So NSE is actually relatively rare. It takes some work to get an NSE decision, and about 1% withdrawn. Now, of course, withdrawn doesn't mean you chose to withdraw it. It could also mean that you failed to meet a 180-day additional information timeline as well. So that's 510K data. As long as we've got this document open, I want to look with you at de novos, because some people are going to say, well, 510Ks are great, but what if I have a de novo? How long is that going to take? And for the last 20 years, it's been all over the map. 2009 was not a good year. In the intervening years around that, not a good year for de novos. Oh, we got a 510K question in Q&A. Steve, are you able to read that for us?
I certainly can.
Before we go on to de novos?
Anonymous person asking, can the FDA be putting more 510Ks on hold in order to stop their clock while being understaffed? So can the FDA artificial delay stuff by putting it on hold because they're understaffed?
Yeah, and it's, of course, not every 510K actually meets the MDUFA goal of 90 days, right? So they do what they have to do. And I'm not. Maybe the questioner wants to ask a follow-up question, but FDA does miss deadlines. It does happen. I feel like what we've noticed more is that they're gonna hit that deadline if they possibly can, because that makes them look good. But we've noticed and heard a lot of folks say, not just us, is that the quality of the reviews is going down when they're understaffed. So they find somebody to throw on it, but it's not clear that the quality of the questions or the reasonableness of the asks is really there. And so I think what we've seen is less of them just, if I were an investor or I were a CEO, my worry would not be FDA is going to miss their review deadline by 3 weeks. That would not be my worry. My worry would be that FDA is going to put a non-qualified reviewer on the project, and they are going to ask questions that are completely clinically or technically not reasonable, not appropriate, and force me to now answer questions with objective evidence, testing, etc., that just isn't appropriate. I'm doing fluff work at that point. So I think that's the bigger concern. But can they do that? Yeah, if they're short-staffed, they do miss deadlines, but less than missed deadlines. I'd worry more about the appropriateness of throwing non-qualified staff to answer questions, or to ask questions. That was a great question. Appreciate it. We'll go on to de novos, and if anyone else has any questions, we'd be happy to address them as well. So pre-COVID, de novo timelines, more on average, right? We said 140 days on average of late for 510Ks, but something more akin to 260 days for de novos. And then during COVID, that really bumped up quite a bit. So de novos all over the place, a lot of volatility there. Not a good time right now, but we trust that those numbers are coming down. If you look at this though, the companies, right? The companies are spending half a year or more responding to FDA in a de novo. They're actively spending half a year or more responding to the agency. So, not as many de novos received, 73 during fiscal year 2023 by the third quarter. 50 of them accepted or need further work, another 18. And let's see if we can find the number on how many review cycles, 1.29 average review cycles. The maximum FDA days to MDUFA decision, 150 days during this calendar year. There have only been 3 de novos granted in fiscal year 2023. 2 withdrawn, so you're up there, you're batting with FDA. And it appears that of the ones that have either been granted or withdrawn, it's about 50-50. So that's not a wonderful percentage to be up against. And of course, granted now here's only 42%. Here's our percentages. Declined 14%, withdrawn 28%, deleted 14%. So not great odds on the de novo front in fiscal year 2023, but interesting nonetheless. One more thing, as long as we've got this open, pre-subs, people wonder how many pre-subs FDA is dealing with. Well, about 2,800 received as of 6/30/2023. So they are dealing with nearly 6,000 pre-subs a year, which is quite a few. We won't break this down all the way, but just so you know, documents like this exist, and you can go read 288 pages of FDA Medufa statistics. And if you are an investor or you are a CEO, I can say that this might be a good document for you to at least crack open and have an idea of what you're up against. But back to the original question. What does it really take to get this through? Well, we've seen the answer. Somewhere these days in the vicinity of 260 days on average, but that's a wildly varying number for a de novo. 140 days on average for a 510K, but that's a wildly varying number. Maybe the more important question is this: what can you do as a startup, as an entrepreneur, as somebody working on a startup, as an investor, to minimize the delays? Let's talk about 3 areas. The first area is before the submission itself. Before you make a submission, what can you do to minimize the delays? Well, if your device is subject to design controls, don't you dare get to a 510K submission without having developed the device under design controls. As we've shown on the show before, you can map the kinds of things that you need to address in design controls pretty directly to the sections of a 510K that you need to submit. It doesn't mean at all that everything that you put in your design controls is going to FDA for your 510K, but it is really how this information gets created. Don't forget to review the contents of a 510K, which we've covered on the show as well, and certainly work with folks who've seen recent submissions and recent hiccups. When you're in the middle of the submission, how do you do it? What do you need to do when you're putting that submission together? Probably the most important thing is make sure you've got all the right parts in there. There's nothing more embarrassing than getting a rejection by the FDA, which these days, it's no longer the refuse to accept checklist. Historically, there was a 2-week refuse to accept period, and that is going away with the advent of eStar. But now they can just sort of electronically look at it and go, hey, is this good enough? But make sure you've got all the required parts. If you give them an incomplete submission that doesn't even have all the things that they ask for, you're going to regret it pretty quickly. Don't worry, you have 180 days to respond. But after the submission, and I think this is one of the most overlooked parts of the process. Maybe you've had a pre-sub, maybe you haven't, but you make your submission to FDA. And your team is going to have an idea of what it's very confident about and the parts of the submission that you're a little bit less confident about. Places you're worried that the FDA may ask you a question. Those are the places to not stop working. Because it's going to take at least 2 months before the FDA probably gets back to you with anything substantial. You can buy yourself 2 extra months in the process if you don't wait for the FDA. You made the best submission you could. You made it as robust as you could. You in good faith submitted with the information you believe you need to satisfy the agency. But if there's any doubt in your mind, doing that additional testing, documenting whatever else you can, especially on areas that you think may raise questions with the agency, if it does and they come back asking for additional information, your turnaround time might be a week instead of 2 more months. Or, in the worst case, that additional 180 days that you're allotted but you don't really want to use. Because if you go to 181 days, your 510K is off the books and you have to start all over again. So this is just some advice for if you're going out there to submit a 510K or a de novo. These are kinds of the timelines. You should be thinking, if we just bring it all the way back. Is this a 3-month process? Because that's what the FDA says. They want to review it in 90 days. No, it's not a 3-month process, except in the best of cases. This is something that you should think of for a 510K as about a half a year, or for a de novo as closer to 3/4 or most of a year. The reality is that in both cases, many companies, because of additional information requests, will find themselves engaged with the FDA over the course of a substantially longer portion of the year than 6 months. And that really covers all sorts of devices. We're not talking about PMAs here, but in terms of Class 1 and Class 2 devices subject to 510K, that 6 months to a year window is really what you should be thinking about once the device is submitted to FDA. Not once you have a prototype, not once you have a manufacturable design, but from the time that the FDA gets your completed 510K submission. So hopefully that helps. Happy to take any questions that may be there. Or if you have any later, send it to us, contact@medtechcrossroads.com. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. Share it with your friends. We love getting questions from you. Lots of good questions this week and last week. And yeah, we just hope that the time that you spend on MedTech Crossroads will save you time in your medical product development journey.